Story this morning. I was all ready for this one. So a guy walked in to the psychiatrist's office wearing his full Napoleon Bonaparte, outfit and his hand in his thing, and he nodded respectfully and he sat down on the couch. And the psychiatrist said, "So, how long have you lived with this delusion?" The guy said, "Hold on there. I'm fine. I'm here to talk about my wife. She is under the delusion that I am someone called Mr. Smith." All right, so we've been talking about women in early Christianity, and we've looked at some various things in various books of the Bible, but what we can forget is that in the first 300 years of Christianity, when Christianity was illegal, there was no Bible, there was no collection of texts. What we call the canon, and that's C-A-N-O-N, the collection of New Testament texts that are like accepted as part of Christianity, that was selected by a bunch of bishops in the year 325. And they were selecting from actually, yes. Well, thank you. If it's there, I'll never remember it, but whatever is here.
Last piece of the German cheesecake.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. In the year 325, all these bishops gathered together to decide what were the texts that were going to be in the official canon of Scripture. And they had piles of texts. They had about 30 different Gospels from which they chose 4. They had all of these different letters, epistles, from which they chose a certain number. I think it was like 18, something like that. They had a whole bunch of apocalypse stories, of which they chose 1, the book of Revelation. And they also had a bunch of different, what scholars call hagiographies. Those are biographies of saints. And of all of that collection, they chose 1, the Acts of the Apostles. So there were all of these other texts, all of these other Gospels, letters, novellas, all of these things that they said, no, that's not allowed in. We'll never speak of that again. That's going to become a heresy. And one of the texts that they left out, actually one of the most popular texts in early Christianity, did not make it into the Bible. And it was a little book called The Acts of Paul and Thecla. We're going to take a look at it, kind of briefly together today. And we're going to talk about why it is that the bishops decided not to use it. But in the early years of Christianity, this was one of the favorites. This was one of the favorite saints, and it was one of the favorite stories. Now, in the Acts of Paul and Thecla, one of the things that it's really interesting for is that it gives us a rare physical description of Paul. And this is the only surviving description of what he looked like. At length, they saw a man coming, namely Paul, of short stature, with meeting eyebrows, bald head, bow-legged, strongly built, hollow-eyed, and with a large crooked nose. And he was full of grace. So in this composite portrait of Paul, we find out that if we encountered him in real life, he would be like Danny DeVito. He'd be like a little round bald guy with a unibrow and a hooked nose. And we learn very little, from Paul himself. He doesn't describe what he looks like, but he tells us in his letters, he says, well, people say that I'm this annoying little guy with a high, whiny voice. And he also said in another one of his letters that he had some physical defect Matter of fact, the English expression, a thorn in my side, literally comes from an English translation of one of Paul's letters. He said, I have a thorn in my side that keeps me from fully enjoying life. And scholars have looked at that in various ways, but he doesn't go into any further detail because he was writing to people who knew him. What little we know of the historical Paul was that he went by a nickname, Paulus. His name was Saul. People called him Paulus. Now, Saul is in the Hebrew language. Paulus is in the Greek language. It means stumpy. It means little guy. So what we find out in the Acts of Paul and Thecla, it does kind of match what little we know about Paul, that he seems to have been this little annoying guy. So in this book, he comes into town and he's on a street corner and he's giving a lecture about chastity and virginity. And he's lecturing, and this young lady, kind of from a rich household, she is sitting by her window and she's listening to this guy. And here we have kind of this ancient depiction of Paul and Thecla. Now, the speech that is attributed to Paul in this is kind of modeled on the Beatitudes. Blessed are the so-and-so and blessed are the so-and-so, whatever. But the author here has kind of taken that form, the Beatitudes, and kind of melded it with like sayings of Paul. So he says, for example, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are they who keep their flesh undefiled, for they shall be the temple of God. Blessed are they who have wives, but live as though they didn't have them, for they shall be made angels. Blessed are the bodies and souls of virgins, for they are acceptable to God and shall not lose their reward. For the word of their Father shall prove effectual to their salvation in the day of his Son, and they shall enjoy rest forevermore. So Paul is giving this sermon about chastity. This young lady hears him. And she starts following him around. And the next day when her parents say to her, like, we've arranged a marriage for you, she refuses. And for the crime of disobeying her parents, it is decreed that she will be burned alive. But then we read in it, when they had placed the wood in order and the people commanded her to go upon it, she did, making first the sign of the cross. Then the people set fire to the pile, and though the flame was exceedingly large, it did not touch her, for God took compassion on her and caused a great eruption from the earth beneath, and a cloud from above to pour down great quantities of rain and hail, so that by the rupture of the earth very many were in great danger, and some were killed. But the fire was extinguished, and Thecla was preserved. So this first miracle, she prays to God, and God sends a rain to put out the fire. She goes home, and then this rich man starts following her around, and he really wants to marry her. She refuses to marry him, and so as punishment, she is thrown to the wild animals in the arena. However, when she's in there with all of these lions circling around her, this she-lion steps forward and tears all of the male lions apart, and Thecla gets rescued from that. Afterward, we read, they brought out many other wild beasts, but Thecla stood with her hands stretched toward heaven and prayed, and when she finished praying, she turned around and saw a pit of water and said, now is a proper time for me to be baptized. So she's in the middle of the Roman arena, and now she sees this tank of water, and she says, in your name, O Lord Jesus Christ, I am this last day baptized. And she jumps into this pool of water. And the Romans are so kind of amazed and confused by this that they let her go. Now, the story runs into greater controversy when she escapes from the arena and she puts on male clothing. And she starts dressing like a man and traveling around from town to town, teaching other women about Christianity. At length, we read, certain gentlewomen heard of the Virgin Thecla and went to her to be instructed in the oracles of God. And many of them abandoned this world and led a monastic life with her. A good report was spread everywhere, and she wrought several miraculous cures. Saint Thecla, they say, was one of the first teachers of early Christianity. In the story, she is not accompanied by a man, so it's probable that the reason that she was dressed as a man was so that she wouldn't get, attacked on the road between these towns. But still, she takes this authority upon herself. She goes around, she becomes a traveling preacher, kind of like Paul, somebody who would appear in early, Christian, like house church meetings. Many years later, she was out walking between towns, the book tells us, and some robbers kind of saw this person, whether they thought the person was male or female, but they saw this lone person on the road. And they charged in to attack. And she prayed again, and this time, the story is that God opened up a mountain and then closed it again with Thecla inside. And this is the end of her story. She does not appear again. She does not die. She just gets closed up in this mountain. So she was, for a time, considered to be the first Christian martyr, and was one of the most popular saints in early Christianity. However, in the year 325, when these bishops, when they say the Roman Emperor Constantine gathered up all of the church leaders to decide what Christianity was going to be, so that they could kind of legalize a Christianity in the empire. None of the female church leaders were invited to the meeting. And so the male bishops who were there, they disagreed on a lot of things, but they all agreed unanimously that women could not be church leaders, and that women could not perform baptism. And so this story became, after the fact, it became a heretical story in which this woman baptized herself, but therefore, they said, she was not actually baptized. And if she wasn't baptized, she couldn't be a Christian. And if she wasn't a Christian, she couldn't be a saint. And so she became part of this kind of movement of, the very beginning. I mean, when we think about this for a moment. When we think of Christianity, we think of a patriarchy. We think about a patriarchal kind of hierarchical structure in which only men can have power. There were 300 years of Christianity before that got started. And it was all decided at this one meeting, and it was all voted on by an electorate that was entirely composed of men. So there is still this myth in Christianity that Constantine gathered all of the church leaders and that they all agreed on this. This obviously cannot be true because even the Bible itself tells us that many of the earliest congregations were led by women, and we know that no female church leaders were invited. Now, this image that we're seeing here, now initially, somebody carved this on like a tunnel wall. And they carved Paul and Thecla standing next to each other. Interestingly, in the image, she is a little bit taller than he is, because the person who carved this image had also heard that Paul was kind of a short little guy. And in the original carving, the two of them are both holding up two fingers, showing that they both have the ability to confer blessings. They can both bless people. However, at a later time, somebody else came, and you can see they burned away Thekla's fingers as a sign that she could not bless people. And they also carved out her eyes as to symbolize that she could not have had that kind of special spiritual insight. I just think this is really fascinating, the way that this image here, it kind of shows us two different layers of the history of Christianity. One layer in which male and female could stand next to each other and could both equally confer blessings. And then another layer where it shows that there has been this kind of rejection of that. And then, for thousands of years, the Christian ideal woman has been a, veiled virgin. Probably not what Jesus had in mind. Because the Bible itself, we know, contains numerous documents in which it's reported that women were teaching and leading church services and kind of, playing leadership roles in early congregations. And that's aside from things like the Gospel of Mary or the Acts of Paul and Thecla, like aside from just texts that got thrown away, even the ones that made it into the Bible itself. The letters of Paul and the book of Revelation both talk about many congregations that are led by women. Paul does not think it's a good idea. And the author of the book of Revelation also does not think it's a good idea. But that is their opinion. And they both tell us that a lot of churches are led by women. Paul tells us that there are a lot of early congregations in his time that are led by women speaking in tongues. He does not specify what that means. If you ever look up, like YouTube, people speaking in tongues, it will be hilarious because people are still trying to figure out what it means. Does it mean that they could suddenly speak in languages they didn't know before? Does it mean that they were just babbling incoherently? It probably meant that they were kind of reporting in clear speech about spiritual visions that they had had. But Paul is unspecific about that. He says that women are praying and prophesying in church. It seems that in meetings of early churches, there would be, somebody would report on like a vision that they had had or a dream that they had had or something that they had seen. That would be considered prophesying. And then that person or someone else would then like give a speech talking about what that vision, what that dream, or what that circumstance may have meant. And in the New Testament, we see women doing kind of all of those things. That ends when Constantine gathers the church leaders together, and they all decide that there will never be female priests. This was also when it was decided that there would be no female member of the Trinity. That was another thing that was decided on at the Council of Nicaea. Before this, there had been kind of a range of ideas. There was this idea, the idea of the Christian Trinity was sort of floating around. However, the Holy Spirit, some people considered it to be like a female member of the Trinity. Some people thought that Jesus' mother, Mary, should be a member of the Trinity. There were kind of different ideas about that the Trinity should have like a father and a sort of mother figure and a son. Then these guys got together and they said, no, the Holy Ghost is definitely male, and like there cannot be any women in the Trinity. And that is how it pretty much has been from that day to this. Women have been secondary in Christianity ever since. And yet, If you've ever walked into a church, you will see that the religion is primarily fueled, fed, and funded by women. Imagine for a moment any church on the planet Earth, and now imagine that all of the women in the congregation disappeared. You would come back, 2 weeks later and find probably that the building had burned down. I mean, because somebody had forgotten to put out a candle, or somebody hadn't swept the floors, or 10,000 other things. Or there would be no funds. There would be nobody to pay the preacher's salary. 10 years ago, in 2016, some people asked the Pope, they said, hey, this was Pope Francis, they said, you're a pretty progressive Pope. When will there be female Roman Catholic priests? The Pope did not give a speech. He did not say a prayer. He did not write a book-length, response to this. His response was one single word, nunca, that means never. And that's a pretty bold thing to say in 2016. But now, Christianity is diverse. There are some denominations in which women can be priests and ministers. This Episcopal priest, for example, this is my older sister. And when I'm doing Sunday services here, she's in New Jersey, doing, Episcopal church services. She can turn bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, which I cannot. In our next session, we're going to look at some of the diversity of early Christianity and how Christianity kind of congealed together as one single thing and then began splitting apart again. So do we have any questions today about this? Good. Well, it's such a nice day out that, I was going to assign a quiz, but, it's left over from a college course. Uh-huh.
One question. So, the early church was around 300s.
Uh-huh.
So, it started off as primarily Catholic?
Oh, good. Excellent question. Okay. Right. So there was, so imagine this. There was Jesus, and then a few years after that, there was this thing, the Christ movement, that kind of spread through the empire. And for 300 years, Christianity was this kind of secret club that would meet in this person's living room in this town, and another club would meet in that person's living room in that town, and somebody else. It was all of these little towns had all of these little clubs. They were not in touch with each other. No one club could tell another club how to do it. And we know from the letters of Paul and the book of Revelation, because they both tell us, you go into this town, you find the little Christ club, they're doing this wacky thing. You go to that town, you meet the little Christ club, they're doing this wacky thing. They have not heard of each other, they're not in touch with each other. There are a few kind of traveling preachers, people like Paul, who can go to multiple things, but even Paul in his letters cannot tell them, this is the way they do it in Corinth, you should do it like they do in Corinth. So it was these, little groups, and they were all illegal. And what happened was Emperor Constantine, interestingly, 7 years into his reign, so he became emperor, and then he still spent 7 years feeding Christians to lions in the arena. But then he said, we should legalize Christianity, but we're only going to legalize one Christianity. Everybody has to agree. So they got these guys together. They disagreed a lot. But when they finally came to an agreement, they said, this is going to be, and the word that they used meant this is going to be the universal church. The universal church, that sets the standard. Their word for that was Catholic. So Catholic just means like the universal church. And then that was kind of largely the only game in town for about 1,200 years. And then we're going to see in our next session, there are going to be some scandals. And eventually the scandals in the Catholic Church are going to add up until there's going to be this movement of people saying, you need to fix it. You need to get it back to the way that it was. And the Pope is going to refuse. He's going to say, no, we're not fixing this. We're not changing this. And then that's when the thing is going to break. That's when there's going to be a protest, and that's from that we get the word Protestant. And then there are going to be Protestant churches. Yeah.
So there already was the Jewish faith.
Uh-huh.
Now, I don't know much about that faith, but women did participate in a lot of things in the Jewish faith.
Good. Yeah, now that I think like brings up a really interesting point and a maybe kind of a misconception about Judaism. Okay, imagine this. If you are a Christian, you go to church for an hour a week, and that is when you do your Christianness, right? And you can spend the other 6 days and 23 hours of the week like evicting widows and orphans, or, you know, running a concentration camp, or whatever it is you do, but you go spend an hour a week and you're good. Okay, that's Christianity. That is a church. Now, in Judaism, if we're watching it from the outside, we would say like, oh, look, people are gathering once a week in the synagogue where this guy talks for an hour. It is like Christianity. It's like a church. Actually, Judaism is very different from that. In Judaism, the primary place where you practice your Jewishness is at home. 9/10 of Judaism is done at home. Synagogue, which in Judaism they call the shul, meaning the school, that's where you gather once a week, and it's more like a lesson on how to be Jewish at home. So if we look in from the outside, we say like, oh, Jews go to be Jewish at the synagogue, and it's a male, mostly, you know, usually a male rabbi. But actually, most of Judaism is practiced at home, and the person who is in charge of the home is the mother. That's the person who like lights the Sabbath candles, leads the prayers, you know, in the home. So it's not saying that, I would not say that women are secondary in Judaism the way that they're secondary in Christianity. In Judaism, like your primary teacher is not the rabbi and it's not the priest. Your primary teacher is your mother, who like teaches you how to like, how to be Jewish all day long.
But in the synagogue, it is male.
In synagogues, yes, rabbis are usually male. Yes.
Well, that's why I was wondering if maybe that's where the Christian kind of pulled that part. Because at the synagogue, the women didn't participate.
Yeah. Well, right. It does. I mean, it does raise an interesting question. I can certainly say, like when Jesus was alive and the Jerusalem temple was in operation, the temple priests were male. Then the temple gets destroyed in the year 70. And then begins this kind of era that we are less certain about because all of the texts get destroyed, everything gets burned. But then we see after that there's not going to be a temple priesthood. There are going to be teachers, and the Hebrew word for teacher is rabbi. And then people start just kind of gathering around teachers. So we know that once people start writing things down again, most rabbis are going to be male. I don't know if there were like male and female rabbis after the destruction of the temple. But yes, yeah, rabbi, right, is generally a man's job. Although I would still say that your rabbi, as far as whose job it is to teach you to be Jewish, the rabbi is still secondary to your mother. No? Yeah. Good question. A very complex thing to like kind of open up. Good. All right, good. We will continue next time. I'll see you, actually, I think in just a couple of weeks, in the second Sunday of June. Good.